An elderly lady died without leaving a will. When her greedy daughter came to claim inheritance, the old gardener handed her a diary that made her collapse. The roses swayed in the morning breeze. Sarah Miller, the housekeeper, walked across the dewy grass at 7:15 a martus, squeaked against the wet ground. She carried a tray with Margaret Thompson's morning tea. "Mrs. Thompson?" Sarah called out. "Your tea is ready." No answer. Sarah's steps slowed as she approached the rose garden. Mrs. Thompson lay face down near her prized white roses. Her gardening shears rested beside her open hand. "Mrs. Thompson?" The tray crashed to the ground. Tea splashed across Sarah's shoes. She ran to the elderly woman and touched her shoulder. Cold, stiff. Sarah's hand shook as she pulled out her phone. 911? "Please come quickly. It's 247 Maple Avenue. Mrs. Thompson. She's not breathing." While waiting for the ambulance, Sarah called Victoria Thompson's office in Manhattan. "Thompson Partners, how may I direct your call?" "This is Sarah Miller, Mrs. Thompson's housekeeper. I need to speak with Victoria immediately. Miss Thompson is in a board meeting. Her mother is dead." Silence on the line. Then shuffling sounds. In a Manhattan high-rise, Victoria Thompson stood at the head of a glass conference table. A presentation about the newest corporate merger flickered on the screen behind her. "Miss Thompson?" Her assistant poked her head in. "Emergency call." Victoria checked her Rolex. "I'm in the middle of. It's about your mother." The room went quiet. 20 executives stared at their laptops. "Take 5, everyone," Victoria said. Her heels clicked against the floor as she followed her assistant out. 5 minutes later, she slammed down the phone. "Cancel everything. Get me on the next flight to Boston." Her voice cracked. "And call Frank Davidson." "Your real estate agent?" "Yes." Victoria grabbed her purse. "Tell him to meet me at my mother's house." With the assessment team, the memory hit her as she rode down in the elevator. Their last fight? 2 weeks ago. "I won't sell." Margaret had stood in her garden, gripping her shears. "This is my home. Mother, be reasonable. You can't manage this place anymore. The bills, my bills are my business. When you forget to pay them, they become my business." Margaret had turned away. "Go back to your meetings, Victoria. Your time is too valuable to waste on me." Now, 4 hours later, Victoria's BMW crunched up the gravel driveway of 247 Maple Avenue. 3 police cars and an ambulance crowded the circular drive. Frank Davidson's SUV pulled in behind her, carrying 2 property assessors. Sarah blocked the front door. "They're still examining the body." "Move aside, Sarah." Victoria brushed past her. "Frank, start in the living room. I want a full inventory." "Your mother isn't even." Sarah's voice broke. Time is critical in these situations. Victoria's heel caught on the antique carpet. She stumbled, caught herself on a marble side table. "The death certificate will take days. We need to move quickly." A detective emerged from the garden. "Miss Thompson?" "I'm Detective Roberts. We'll need to ask you some questions." "About what?" "She was old. She died in her garden. Standard procedure." "Did your mother have a will?" Victoria's stomach tightened. Of course, she stopped. "When was the last time they discussed it?" "We'll need to see it. I'll have to check her files." 4 hours later, Victoria sat in her mother's study. Empty filing cabinets gaped open. Papers covered every surface. No will. Frank stuck his head in. Initial assessments done. The antiques alone. We're talking millions. Plus the property value. There's no will. Victoria cut him off. "Ah." He stepped inside, lowered his voice. "That complicates things. Find me the best estate lawyer in Boston." Victoria pressed her fingers against her temples. "I don't care what it costs." Sarah appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were red. "The funeral home is here." Victoria looked up at the family photos on the wall. Margaret at garden parties, charity events, always alone or with friends. Never with her daughter. Handle it, Sarah. You know what she would have wanted. Victoria turned back to the papers. I have work to do. Sarah lingered. There's something you should know later. Victoria waved her away. Just handle the funeral. After Sarah left, Victoria gripped the edge of the desk. The wood was smooth, worn by her mother's hands over decades. Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard and picked up her phone. Frank, get me more assessors tomorrow and contact auction houses. I want everything appraised. Outside, they wheeled Margaret's body past her prize roses. The white petals trembled in the evening breeze. The funeral home smelled of lilies. Victoria sat in the front office, tapping her heel against the carpet. Her mother's body lay somewhere in the back rooms. The platinum package includes, the funeral director started. Whatever's fastest. Victoria checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her office. When can we hold the service? Well, with expedited processing. Day after tomorrow? Do it. Outside, she called Thomas Green, her mother's lawyer. His secretary put her straight through. Victoria, I'm so sorry about Margaret. I need to start the inheritance process immediately. Silence on the line. Then, have you found your mother's will? There isn't one? That's unexpected. Margaret was usually so thorough. How long will this take without a will? Months, potentially. There's a legal process, months? Victoria's voice rose. I have assessors at the house right now. They'll have to stop. Without proof of executorship, I'm her only child. There are still procedures, court approvals. Other potential claimants, what others? I'm her daughter, cousins, your father, technically. Any charitable beneficiaries she may have designated? Victoria pressed her fingers against her temples. A memory surfaced. Age 16, moving boxes into her father's Beacon Hill townhouse after the divorce. You can't abandon your mother, Sarah had said, watching her pack. Watch me dot single quotes, her father's voice from the doorway. The car's waiting. Princess. Now, 29 years later, Victoria stood in her mother's study again. Frank Davidson hovered nearby. The assessors have to leave? He asked. Temporarily. Victoria yanked open another drawer. There has to be something. Bank documents. Investment records. Sarah appeared with a stack of papers. I found these in the garden shed. Victoria snatched them. Bank statements. Her hands trembled as she read. This can't be right. She flipped through the pages. These account balances. Your mother was very generous, Sarah said quietly. These donations. Thousands every month. To who? She never said. Victoria slammed the statements down. She was emptying the accounts. Why didn't anyone tell me? She was of sound mind. It was her money. It was my inheritance. The doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer it. Voices filled the foyer. Voices filled the foyer. Victoria recognized her cousin Michael's Boston accent. Where is she? Heavy footsteps approached the study. Victoria. Michael filled the doorway. Behind him stood their Aunt Patricia and 2 more cousins. Hiring assessors before the funeral? Michael's face was red. Real classy. This isn't your concern. Like hell it isn't. Aunt Margaret was family. I'm her daughter. The daughter who never visited? Aunt Patricia stepped forward. Who tried to force her to sell her home? I was protecting her assets. Your assets? You mean? Michael jabbed a finger at her. We all know why you're really here. Victoria straightened her spine. Get out. All of you. We're gonna fight this, Michael said. You wanna push this through probate? Fine. We'll be there. After they left, Victoria called her office. Cancel my meetings for the next 2 weeks. She stared out the window at the garden where her mother died. And get me the number for Harrison and Reed, the top probate attorneys in Boston. The roses swayed in the evening breeze. Victoria watched a petal fall. Her phone buzzed. A text from Frank. Auction house is interested. Major potential. Need to move fast. Victoria's fingers tightened on the phone. She had to find a way to speed this up. There had to be something. Sarah cleared her throat from the doorway. There's something you need to see. Not now. It's about your mother. Her diary. I said not now. Victoria's voice echoed off the walls. Just handle the funeral arrangements. That's your job. Sarah's face hardened. As you wish, Miss Thompson. Victoria turned back to the window. She had a war to plan. The family wanted a fight? Fine. She'd give them one. The roses trembled as the wind picked up. Storm clouds gathered overhead. Rain drummed against the church windows. Victoria sat in the front pew, staring at her mother's closed casket. The priest's voice droned on about eternal rest. Someone slid into the pew beside her. Sarah. Not now, Victoria whispered. Sarah placed a leather-bound book on the bench between them. She would have wanted you to have this. Victoria glanced down. The diary's spine was cracked, pages yellow with age. Her mother's careful handwriting filled every page. When did she? After the service. Sarah stood. Read it alone. The funeral passed in a blur. Victoria clutched the diary through the condolences, the cemetery service, the reception at the house. Finally, everyone left. Victoria sat in her mother's study, the diary heavy in her lap. She opened to a random page. October 15th, 2023. Another donation to the Children's Hospital today. Anonymous, as always. The new wing will help so many families. If only Victoria could understand, wealth isn't about possession. It's about purpose. Victoria's hands shook. She flipped back further. May 3rd, 2022, Victoria sent more real estate agents. She thinks I'm losing my mind. She sees only the mansion's value, not its heart, not the memories of her childhood running through these halls. Does she remember none of it? Thunder cracked outside. Victoria jumped. She turned to the most recent entry. April 1st, 2024. My daughter visits tomorrow. Another fight about selling, no doubt. She's become exactly what her father was. All ambition, no soul. Where did I go wrong? When did money become more important than love? The diary slipped from Victoria's fingers. It hit the floor with a thud. Her phone rang. Michael. The lawyers found something interesting. He said without preamble. Aunt Margaret made regular donations to half a dozen charities. They might have legal standing. I know about the donations. Victoria's voice sounded hollow. We're filing a motion to freeze all assets pending. Victoria hung up. She picked up the diary again, turning to the earliest pages. September 12th, 1995, Victoria left today. Chose her father's wealth over our home. She's only 16, too young to understand what really matters. Will she ever learn? A knock at the study door. Sarah, the lawyer's here. About the probate hearing? Victoria didn't look up from the diary. Cancel it. He came all the way from Boston. I said cancel it. Victoria's voice cracked. She took a breath. I need time. Sarah lingered in the doorway. There's more? Bank records, documents, your mother. She left a paper trail. Victoria finally looked up. Sarah's face was tight with disapproval. Show me. Sarah returned with a cardboard box. Inside lay folders, bank statements, letters. She donated most of it, Sarah said. The money, the investments. All that's really left is the house. Victoria pulled out a stack of thank you letters from charities. Children's hospitals, homeless shelters, domestic violence centers. All addressed to anonymous donor. Why didn't she tell me? Would you have listened? Victoria stared at her mother's signature on a donor agreement. The same elegant script that filled the diary. Her phone buzzed. Frank Davidson. 3 auction houses are interested. We need to move. Stop. Victoria's voice was flat. Cancel everything. But the assessments. Cancel. It all. She ended the call. Sarah still stood in the doorway. The family lawyer called, Sarah said. The probate hearing is scheduled for next week. They need you to prove you can maintain the property's historical status. Victoria looked around the study. Family photos on every wall. Generations of memories. What did she want? Victoria whispered. For the house? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Read the last page. Victoria opened the diary to the final entry, dated 2 days before her mother's death. The words blurred before her eyes. Outside, the storm raged on. Victoria sat across from James Chun, her mother's financial advisor. His office overlooked Boston Harbor, but she barely noticed the view. Bank statements covered his desk. It started small, Chun said. Monthly donations of a few thousand. Then more. Bigger amounts. How much total? Chun slid over a spreadsheet. Victoria's breath caught. 15 million? Over 10 years? Your mother was strategic. Chun adjusted his glasses. She kept enough for maintenance, property taxes, basic needs. Everything else went to strangers. Victoria's voice was flat. The causes she believed in. Chun pulled up records on his computer. Look at the pattern. Victoria leaned forward. Each donation had a purpose. Children's cancer research, domestic violence shelters, educational funds. Could we reverse any of these? Her voice sounded hollow even to herself. They're legally binding. Chun paused, and very public. The Children's Hospital wing bears her name. Victoria's head snapped up. I thought the donations were anonymous. The last ones weren't. He turned his monitor toward her. A photo showed Margaret cutting a ribbon, smiling. The plaque behind her read, Thompson Memorial Wing. When was this? 3 months ago. Chun hesitated. You weren't there? Victoria stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. I need air. Outside, she called her lawyer. Find a way to challenge these donations, she demanded. There must be something, Miss Thompson. His voice was careful. These organizations have already put the money to use. Buildings constructed, programs funded. Fighting this would be problematic. Problematic how? The publicity alone. Wealthy daughter tries to take back mother's charitable donations. It wouldn't play well. Victoria ended the call. Her phone immediately buzzed with a text from Sarah. Channel 5 News, requesting comment about the hospital wing. Another buzz. Boston Globe asking about Margaret Thompson's charitable legacy. A third. Children's Hospital planning memorial service. Victoria's hand shook as she shoved the phone in her pocket. She walked to the nearest coffee shop, ordered black coffee, sat in a corner booth. The diary sat in her purse, heavy as lead. She pulled it out, opened to a random page. July 15th, 2020. Another check written today. The shelter needs beds. How can I refuse? Victoria would call it foolish, depleting my estate this way. She doesn't understand. Giving fills empty spaces inside. Spaces money never could. The coffee grew cold. Victoria kept reading. December 25th, 2021 Christmas, alone again. Sent the usual check to the Children's Hospital. Their holiday party, all those small faces lighting up, worth every penny. Victoria sent her usual gift basket from her assistant. Still hasn't learned. Presence matters more than presents. A shadow fell across the table. Victoria looked up. A woman stood there, maybe 60, wearing hospital scrubs. Sorry to interrupt, she said. I recognized you from the papers. I'm Dr. Helen Roberts. I worked with your mother at the Children's Hospital. Victoria's throat tightened. She never mentioned every Friday for 5 years. Reading to the kids in oncology. Dr. Roberts smiled. They called her Grandma Rose. Rose? She always brought flowers from her garden. Said they helped the healing. Victoria's coffee cup trembled in her hand. The new wing she funded, Dr. Roberts continued. It's already saved lives. Your mother's legacy. I have to go. Victoria stuffed the diary in her purse, nearly knocking over a coffee. Back in her car, she called Sarah. The hospital wing opening. Victoria said, there must be photos in her study. Bottom drawer. Victoria drove to the mansion. The study door creaked open. The drawer held an album. Photos of Margaret with children in hospital beds. Margaret reading stories. Margaret in a sauna hat at Christmas parties. Victoria's phone rang. Her lawyer again. The probate hearing, he said. We need to focus on the mansion. It's the only significant asset left. Victoria stared at a photo of her mother hugging a bald child. How much? She whispered. What? How much is the mansion worth? Current market value. Around 12 million. But maintaining the historical status requirements, Victoria closed the album. I'll call you back. She opened the diary again. The pages fell open to a familiar date. The day she'd left for her father's. My daughter chose money over love today. Pray she learns its true value before it's too late. Outside, roses bloomed in the garden where Margaret died. Victoria stood in the mansion's grand foyer. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows on the hardwood floors. A preservation specialist moved around her, taking notes. The woodwork is original 1880s, he said. All hand-carved. Victoria touched the banister. Her fingers found a small notch from when she'd crashed her toy car into it at age 6. Annual maintenance costs? She asked. For historical certification, he checked his clipboard. Minimum $250,000, plus emergency repairs, specialized contractors. Show me everything. They moved through the house. Every room held a price tag. Every historical detail demanded maintenance. The roof needs immediate work, he said in the attic. Original slate tiles. Very expensive. Victoria barely heard him. A dusty trunk sat in the corner, her name written in faded marker. Give me a moment. When he left, she opened the trunk. Her old things. Report cards, school photos, a dried rose corsage from prom. Your father sent a car for that dance. Sarah's voice came from behind. You didn't even say goodbye. Victoria turned. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Why are you here? The Historical Society called. They're sending an inspector. Another one? They're concerned. Sarah stepped closer. About your intentions. Victoria pulled out a photo album. Her 10th birthday party in the garden. When did she start? Victoria asked. The hospital visits? After you left. Sarah's voice softened slightly. She said empty rooms need filling. Victoria's fingers trembled on the album pages. Her mother's handwriting beneath each photo. Victoria's first bike ride. Victoria's dance recital. Victoria's last Christmas home. Miss Thompson? The preservation specialist called from downstairs. There's more to see. They toured the grounds next. The garden shed needed repairs. The greenhouse glass needed replacing. The rose garden. Victoria stopped at the spot where they'd found her mother. The gardens are historically protected too, the specialist said. The rose varieties. I know about the roses. Victoria's voice was sharp. She wrote about them enough in the diary. Always the roses. Their names, their care, their meaning. A car crunched up the driveway. An elderly man emerged. George? Victoria recognized her mother's old gardener. What are you doing here? Still tend the roses twice a week. He touched a white bloom gently. Your mother's standing orders. She's gone, but her roses ain't. George straightened. She loved these flowers more than anything. He paused. Almost anything. Victoria turned away. The inspection is over. I need to make calls. Inside her mother's study, Victoria called her lawyer. The maintenance costs are impossible, she said. No bank will loan against a property with these restrictions. There might be another way. He paused. The Historical Society is interested in purchasing, converting it to a museum. A museum? They'd preserve everything. The gardens, the architecture. How much? Less than market value, but it would solve the maintenance issue. Victoria hung up. She opened the diary again. March 3rd, 2024. The roses bloom early this year, like they know I'm fading. Told George to keep tending them after I'm gone. Some things should survive us. A knock at the door. Sarah. Found these in the garden shed. She placed a stack of papers on the desk. Receipts. Every rose bush she ever planted. Victoria picked up the top receipt. The date. September 13th, 1995. The day after she'd left. White roses, she read. For new beginnings. Sarah nodded. She planted one every year on that date. Victoria stood abruptly. I need to see something. She walked to the garden. Counted the white roses. 29 bushes. One for each year she'd been gone. Her phone buzzed. The Historical Society. Not now, she whispered. She sat on the garden bench, opened the diary to its last entry. The preservation specialist approached. Miss Thompson? About the maintenance schedule. Tomorrow. Her voice cracked. Come back tomorrow. When he left, Victoria read her mother's final words again. Then she called her lawyer. Cancel the Historical Society meeting, she said. But the maintenance costs, I said cancel it. She had a hearing to prepare for. The courthouse loomed over Victoria. Gray stone, high windows. She gripped her mother's diary as she climbed the steps. Her lawyer waited at the top. The family's all here. Cousins, aunts, I know. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Michael sat in the front row with Aunt Patricia. They didn't look at her. Sarah slipped in just before the judge. She carried a cardboard box. All rise. Judge Eleanor Martinez studied the room over her glasses. Estate of Margaret Thompson, she read. Hearing for probate administration. She looked at Victoria. You're contesting the family's petition? Victoria stood. Yes, Your Honor. On what grounds? I'm her daughter. Her only child. Michael snorted. Aunt Patricia whispered something to her lawyer. The court recognizes the biological relationship, Judge Martinez said. However, there are concerns. Victoria's hands tightened on the diary. Your Honor, Michael's lawyer stood. We have evidence of Miss Thompson's actions toward the deceased. He produced documents, real estate listings, assessment reports. She tried to force the sale of her mother's home, he continued. Against explicit wishes. To protect her, Victoria interrupted. Really? The lawyer held up bank statements. Like protecting these accounts? The ones you tried to gain control of? Victoria felt sweat on her neck. Your Honor, her lawyer started. Let her answer, Judge Martinez said. Victoria swallowed. I was concerned about her mental state. Concerned? Michael stood. You hadn't visited in months. Years. Order, Judge Martinez warned. Sarah walked forward. Place the box on the evidence table. If it pleases the court, she said quietly. Mrs. Thompson left something. The judge nodded. Proceed. Sarah opened the box. Pulled out photos, letters, hospital records. Margaret Thompson's charitable works, Sarah explained. All documented. Victoria watched as Sarah laid out her mother's life. The hospital wing, the shelter donations, the children's programs. And this, Sarah held up the diary. Her private thoughts. Objection, Michael's lawyer said. Personal writings are admissible? Judge Martinez cut in. Continue. Sarah opened the diary. Read. My daughter sees wealth as power. But true power lies in what we give, not what we keep. The mansion, the money, they're tools, not treasures. Victoria must learn this before it's too late. Victoria's throat burned. Ms. Thompson, Judge Martinez leaned forward. Do you understand what managing this estate means? The responsibilities? Victoria stood. Her legs shook. The room spun. Faces blurred. She saw her mother in the garden. Roses blooming. Children laughing in hospital beds. Her voice cracked. I request a recess. She stumbled out before the judge could respond. Found an empty hallway. Slid down the wall. The diary fell open in her lap. My greatest failure wasn't losing the money. It was losing my daughter to it. Footsteps approached. Sarah, the judge wants an answer, she said. Victoria looked up. Did she ever forgive me? Sarah sat beside her. Read the last page again. Victoria turned to the final entry. Read the words she'd been avoiding. Victoria will come when I'm gone. She see the empty accounts, the donated wealth, and she'd be angry. But maybe, finally, she understand. Money buys mansions. Love builds homes. I leave her the harder path, the one I should have shown her sooner, the path of giving. My last gift to my daughter, the chance to learn what I learned too late. Victoria closed the diary. I need to go back in there, she whispered. Sarah helped her up. The courtroom fell silent as Victoria walked to the center. Your Honor, her voice was steady now. I'd like to present my plans for the estate. Judge Martinez nodded. Proceed. Victoria took a deep breath. The roses waited in the garden. Her mother's last lesson waited in her hands. Victoria sat cross-legged on her mother's bedroom floor, diary open in her lap, surrounded by photo albums. Morning light streamed through lace curtains. Day 3. Sarah stood in the doorway with coffee. You've barely moved. Listen to this. Victoria's voice was hoarse. She read, April 15th, 2019. Today at the hospital, little Amy asked why I bring roses. They're too pretty for sick people, she said. I told her that's exactly why sick people need them most. Beauty heals differently than medicine. Sarah set the coffee down. She spent every Friday there. Rain or shine, Victoria flipped pages. More entries, more revelations. September 3rd, 2021. The shelter needed winter coats. Sold grandmother's emerald necklace. Victoria would be furious. Family heirlooms, she'd say. But I saw Maria's face when she tried on her coat. Some treasures wore more than necks. The doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer it. Voices drifted up. Then footsteps on the stairs. Ms. Thompson? A small woman in a shelter uniform appeared. I'm Lisa Chun. From New Beginnings Shelter? Victoria didn't look up. Another donation recipient? Actually, Lisa stepped in. I run it now, but 12 years ago, I lived there. With my kids. Now Victoria looked up. Your mother, Lisa's voice caught. She didn't just give money. She gave time. Taught our women gardening. Said growing things helps you believe in tomorrow. Victoria's fingers trembled on the diary pages. Did she... Victoria swallowed. Did she ever mention me? Only that she had a daughter who'd lost her way. But that lost things usually find their way home. After Lisa left, Victoria found another entry. June 12, 2023. Victoria sent her assistant with my birthday gift. Another expensive bag. Empty inside, like our relationship. Meanwhile, Jenny from the shelter made me a card. Drew roses all over it. Said I taught her that broken things can bloom again. The phone rang. Her office. The merger papers need. I'm not coming back. Victoria's voice surprised her. Send my resignation. She hung up before they could respond. Sarah appeared with more coffee. The hospital called, she said. They're holding a memorial service next week. Victoria nodded. Turned another page. November 4th, 2023. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Should tell Victoria, but she'd only see problems to solve, assets to protect. My daughter lives in a vault of her own making. All that wealth, all that emptiness. A tear splashed on the page. Victoria wiped it away. She knew, she whispered. She knew she was dying. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have listened? Victoria closed the diary, opened a photo album instead. Pictures of her mother at the shelter, teaching women to plant herbs in window boxes. At the hospital, reading to children. At charity galas, not as a guest, but a servant, serving food, washing dishes. I never knew her at all. Sarah sat beside her. You knew the mother you chose to see. Victoria pulled out her phone, pulled up her bank balance. The mansion's maintenance costs. She looked at Sarah. What if we read the last entries first? Sarah said. All of them. Victoria turned to the final pages. Read through blurred eyes. March 15th, 2024. The roses will bloom soon. My last spring. Made arrangements for everything. The house, the gardens. Left Victoria a choice. Pray she chooses wisely. March 30th, 2024, tired today. But the children at the hospital needed their story time. Read them The Secret Garden. How fitting. My own garden holds secrets too. Victoria will find them. When she's ready, the final entry. April 1st, 2024. 3 days before she died. Victoria read it again and again. Then she stood. I need to make some calls. Sarah smiled slightly. The kind your mother would make, or the kind you used to? Victoria looked at the diary in her hands. The kind I should have made a long time ago. She had a legacy to understand, and a garden to tend. Victoria stood in the mansion's empty foyer. Moving boxes lined the walls. Her designer clothes, corporate files, Manhattan life, all packed away. A small suitcase sat by the door. Her new apartment keys lay on top. Second floor walk up? Sarah said, coming down the stairs. Your mother would have laughed. She'd have loved it. Victoria smiled slightly. It has a window box. The doorbell rang. Michael stood outside with Aunt Patricia. Come in, Victoria said before they could speak. I want to show you something. She led them to the study. Blueprints covered the desk. The Margaret Thompson Community Center, she explained. First floor, classrooms, counseling rooms, children's library. Second floor, job training facilities, women's shelter. Michael picked up a blueprint. The garden, public space, educational programs. The roses stay, obviously. Aunt Patricia touched the plans. You're giving up the mansion? Not giving up. Victoria opened her mother's diary. Giving back. The doorbell rang again. Sarah went to answer it. Lisa Chun from the shelter entered. Behind her, Dr. Roberts from the hospital. More faces Victoria now knew from her mother's photos. Thank you for coming, Victoria said. Please, sit. They gathered in the living room. Victoria stood by the fireplace. My mother, her voice caught. She started again. Margaret Thompson left more than a mansion. She left a mission. She held up the diary. I've spent 2 weeks reading this, learning who she really was. Who I wasn't, she swallowed. That changes today. She outlined her plan. The community center, the programs, the scholarships. We'll need help, she finished. Your help. To continue what she started. Dr. Roberts spoke first. The children's reading program? Every Friday. In the library, we'll name after her. Lisa Chun wiped her eyes. The shelter space? 10 rooms. Plus training facilities, counseling, childcare. Michael stood. You're serious about this? Read it. Victoria handed him the diary. She wrote about you too. All of you. A real family. While they passed the diary, Victoria walked to the window. The roses bloomed bright in the morning sun. Sarah appeared beside her. "Your new apartment's ready," she said. "It's small. It's enough. The center will take months to set up. I have time." Victoria touched the window glass. "For the first time in my life, I have time." Her phone buzzed. The movers were here. They worked through the afternoon. Victoria's boxes went to her new apartment. The mansion's furniture stayed, rearranged for its new purpose. At sunset, Victoria stood in the garden. Her last night as the mansion's owner. Tomorrow, the lawyers would transfer everything to the foundation. She knelt by her mother's roses, touched a white petal. "The hardest bloom," George said behind her, "takes the most care. You'll teach me?" The old gardener smiled. "Your mother said you'd ask." Eventually, Victoria stood, brushed dirt from her jeans. She wore jeans now. Sarah brought out tea. They sat on the garden bench, watching the sun set. "Scared?" Sarah asked, terrified. Victoria sipped her tea. "What if I fail?" "You won't." "How do you know?" Sarah pointed to the roses. "Because you finally see them. Not their value, their beauty." Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from Lisa Chun. "Committee meeting tomorrow?" Another from Dr. Roberts. "Children's program planning lunch?" A third from Michael. "Need help moving?" Victoria smiled, turned off her phone. The roses swayed in the evening breeze. Her mother's diary lay in her lap. Tomorrow would bring changes, challenges, choices. But tonight she just sat, watched the flowers bloom, and finally understood. 6 months later, Victoria stood under a white tent in the garden. 100 folding chairs faced a small podium. Behind it, the mansion gleamed in the October sun. "Ready?" Sarah straightened Victoria's simple blue dress. "She should be here." Victoria touched the diary in her pocket. It was her dream. "She is here." Sarah nodded toward the roses. "Look." People filled the chairs. Hospital staff in scrubs. Shelter residents in borrowed dresses. Children from the reading program, fidgeting with paper programs. Michael stood by the podium, testing the microphone. "It's time," he said. Victoria walked up, looked at the faces. 6 months ago, they'd been just names in a diary. Now, "Welcome to the Margaret Thompson Community Center." Her voice carried across the garden. "My mother." She pulled out the diary. "My mother wrote something the day before she died. I'd like to read it." The pages fell open to the final entry. "Tomorrow Victoria comes. She see an empty house, empty accounts, and think I left her nothing. But I leave her everything that matters. A chance to bloom, to give, to grow. The roses know. They always know." Victoria closed the diary. "I didn't understand then. But standing here, seeing all of you, her real legacy," she gestured to the mansion. "This isn't just a building. It's a beginning." She outlined the center's first 6 months. 30 women housed, 50 children in reading programs, job training, counseling, hope. "And the roses," she finished. "They bloom for everyone now." After the ceremony, Victoria walked through the center. Children raced down halls once filled with antiques. Women studied in rooms that had stood empty for years. In the new library, formerly the formal dining room, Dr. Roberts read to a circle of patients. "Just like your mother did," she said when Victoria passed. The shelter wing, once guest rooms, buzzed with activity. Lisa Chun showed a new arrival to her room. "First night's the hardest," Lisa said. "But the roses help." Victoria climbed to her old bedroom, now a counseling center. Sarah waited. "Your mother's diary," Sarah said. "What it said about being ready." Victoria nodded. "I am now." They walked to the garden. George pruned the white roses. "Blooming late this year," he said. "But blooming strong. Single quotes." Victoria touched a petal. "They needed time, like someone else I know." Sarah smiled. Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from her new job, teaching business skills to shelter residents. Another from the hospital, Friday reading program reminder. A third from Michael, family dinner tonight. Victoria turned off her phone, sat on her mother's garden bench. The roses swayed in the autumn breeze. A child laughed somewhere inside. A woman sang softly in the shelter wing. Victoria opened the diary one last time. Read the very last line. The roses know. They always know when it's time to bloom. She closed the book, looked at the mansion. No longer a house, but a home. For everyone. Sarah touched her shoulder. She'd be proud, she said. Victoria smiled. I know. A shelter resident walked past, carrying roses from the garden, going to decorate her new room. Just like Margaret would have wanted. Victoria stood. She had a reading program to prepare for, a legacy to continue, a garden to tend. The roses bloomed around her, white and pure and perfect, just like her mother had planned all along. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!